Welcome, Lorenz. Algorithms, it's been said, know a lot more about us than we know about them. I have a dog, for example, with a heart problem. So I Googled his condition a while back. And when I next went on YouTube, my feed was inundated with the most awful dog and other animal videos depicting cruelty and all kinds of things that I would ordinarily try to avoid. So right now I'm really nervous to go on YouTube for fear of what horrible things await me. And obviously the algorithm is a lot more than just predicting what it thinks we want to see and hear online. So Lorenz, tell us a little bit about your work and what ordinary mortals like myself can do to be more aware of algorithms, and in a way, in the process, perhaps help us to define the word in a way that everybody can understand.
Okay, thank you for having me. Well, our organization came into being in 2016, and we have the people working there, history coming from journalism, from digital rights, and we felt the need for the organization because we talked a lot about data in the last decade, I would say. We had this term big data, for example, but we didn't talk much about the software systems behind these data. The systems which collect the data, the systems which produce the data, and so there came an idea that came from the US, which was called Algorithmic Accountability Reporting, which inspired us a lot, which was basically about trying better to understand what is happening to our data, how these predictions are calculated, and what interests are behind this. We do, for example, one project on labor in the sense of human resources. We have more and more automation going on in this field, and not only when people apply for jobs, that there's a software system sorting through the applications and try to find the right people. And the other one is about credit scoring. This is when you want to have, for example, a loan by the bank, or even if you, at least in Germany where I'm from, when you apply for an apartment, the landlord asks for your credit score, and this credit score is very obscure how it works, and a lot of people in Germany, for example, think these credit scoring is more or less something official, but it's actually a private company behind it, and it's very old. So the data collection is not only Facebook or Google. There are a lot of institutions collecting data about us for 50 or 100 years. So a lot of administration is always about collecting data. That's where statistics coming from. Talking about algorithms, I would say, or argue, for example, that an administration is an algorithm because you put information into it. It's an organic algorithm in a sense, but there are certain rules how to handle this information, and then decisions are made on it. For example, if you apply for a visa to travel somewhere, so there's a process in place, and certain rules apply, and you get the visa or not. And basically every algorithm works like this. So 1 + 1 is 2 is a very basic algorithm, but we have the rule about how addition works, and we apply it. So the input could be any number, but we know how to, or the addition algorithm knows how to handle this. And we use algorithm as a kind of fill-in or stand-in for software systems. And you said it in your intro, The interesting thing about how today algorithms in the internet or in software systems are used is normally to predict what are you going to do or what are you want to do. And so on the one hand side, this is very it's still in your control, because the decision is still on your side, but the information you get presented to have you or to do your decision is controlled by the software systems. Or the thing we look into is, how are these systems built? By whom? What are their interests? What's they're trying to do with this? It's not about that this is all bad. There are a lot of good systems, very helpful. More or less everybody uses the internet, and it's very eye-opening. We have a lot of freedom in a sense to find information. We can use a lot of services which were totally expensive or only for an elite in 20 years ago. But you can be controlled and manipulated. So this algorithmic accountability is about better understand what's going on, who's behind it, and in the end have people be accountable for it.
Listen to FreeSpeak and give us your comments on the NMT's social media feeds. What you said earlier, Lorenz, perhaps I can touch on that again, and that is to go back to the employment algorithm, I think you called it. I've read or I've heard that I think it was a place like Amazon suddenly discovered, or it was discovered, that somehow their employment algorithm was leading them to employ primarily white males. So this is a question, obviously something you look at, that some of these algorithms can have an inbuilt bias, or can lead you in directions which are obviously negative. Given your work in this area and the credit area, what do you do when you find out an algorithm is, for example, faulty or bad? Do you then go to the media? Do you turn to the journalists to expose this? Or do you work with the companies or corporations involved to try and put it right? In other words, how does your work approach activism in this regard? Do you make a fuss?
Well, we have let's say different layers in this. We have one pillar of our work is journalism, which is more or less independent from the rest of our organization, because it has to be able not to be leaded too much by our intent, what our organization is to do. So we make a fuss, but we often try to work together with media outlets, because we are we now a non-profit organization of about, I think, 14 people.
Okay, small.
But we're quite growing in the last, or we will grow about 5 more people this year, and have our first international branch in Switzerland, which is not so far from Germany, but at least we have the second branch. We try to go to policymakers and say we need some regulation on this. So this is the more classical advocacy work probably. And we try to work together with other activists, other non-profit organizations, and try to raise awareness. So this is more or less classical NGO work. But maybe one word about this this bias. This is the very important subject in this area, and the story you told about the Amazon hiring algorithm is quite, let's say, famous in our field, and it's the more or less typical story in this field. These algorithms, they normally learn from data, from statistics, and so this is history more or less, and these statistics represent how society works, or this part of society. So if in the society there is a kind of like racism or sexism already in place, the data reproduces this. And so a software system learning on this with so-called artificial intelligence, which normally means machine learning, which is a certain special branch of artificial intelligence and is not so intelligent at all. It's very narrow AI, is it called, the other term for it, very narrow-minded in a sense. It only can learn what is there, so it reproduces this bias. We have it where there are a lot of other examples on this. One other very famous one is about a software system in place in the United States they're using in the justice systems. This reproduces racism
there is inherent racism anyway.
So it's in the data,
right?
And the software systems
reproduces it.
So to try to unbias it is very hard, because then you have to have certain ideas how society should function, and probably something else will happen with unintended consequences.
Obviously, a lot of the time with regard to this algorithm discussion, we're looking at a lot of the negatives, the areas where I think, again, there's a nervousness out there that algorithms tend to erode at times our freedom of choice, for example, or it kind of supports our prejudices and our biases in some kind of way. So we kind of see it as negative, and we're a little bit nervous as well about it making inroads into our privacy and to make our own choices. Now, I don't know if you have any strong feelings around that and how algorithms resonate with human rights. What's the connection there, and with democracy?
Well, as I said before, I think the way how we're today able to inform ourselves and raise our voices have never been before in history. Every single one is able to go outside and can be read by anyone. So this is positive. Really, it's a revolution, I would say.
Right.
And in the last month, I thought a lot about what David Bowie said once in '99 about the internet. It's an alien life form, and I think this is the best description of it, because we have more or less still no idea how to really cope with it, how to handle it, because it's so powerful, and you see how governments try to handle it, and they're more or less not able to regulate, for example, Facebook. Or on the other hand, you see journalism is more or less the former idea how journalism functions is gone. It's erased, and nothing new has come in.
That's right.
So in the special case of so-called algorithms or artificial intelligence or machine learning systems, automated decision-making systems, there is a huge, let's say, hope that it will change a lot in health, like predict if somebody's probably going or has a risk of cancer, because you have in image recognition there a lot of advances in the last few years. So we have some areas where these software systems are much better than humans to detect certain patterns, and so in health there's
great advances in this regard.
On the other hand, of course, it is a lot about privacy.
Right.
If the big companies get access to the health data, and we have examples, I think, in the UK, the NHS, the National Health Service, has a kind of deal with Google to give them the data on more or less every patient in UK. This is a lot about privacy, because health, and it can be a risk if, for example, the one you're working for learns about that you're going to be ill, or the risk is high. So this is a very problematic thing, and it's a lot about data security and the question about who has access to your data, how to control this. So this all is more interconnected. The questions about privacy, data security, data rights. One last bad example, it just came up a few days ago. We had in the US a software company was paid by the pharmaceutical industry to promote opiate pharmacy. So I think it was Bloomberg reported on it that several 10,000 doctors use this software. It was biased in the sense that prescribed opiate,
and obviously fueling the addiction, which is a huge crisis.
And so this is again about responsibility on the side of people building the systems.
I think that's very important. It seems to me from just having this discussion that this is, and your type of organization, which, as you say, there's, of yourselves and a couple in the US, is something that will need to increase in the future, because we will need to be monitoring, as you say. There's some really good things, but there's also some bad ways in which data can be manipulated and all these things can happen. But you also touched on journalism there, Lorenz, and I noticed that the Nieman Lab has described the algorithmic beat as journalism's next frontier. How do you see the algorithm both impacting the work of journalism in the future, and also to what extent will journalism need to be covering the algorithmic beat?
Well, we have this aspect that what news are today are more or less driven by what's going on in social media. Of course, Trump is the best example.
Yes.
And our public spheres are now more and more digital. The reaction to the digital era is much too slow. And we, at least in Germany, I can't speak too much about other countries, we lost more or less, I would say, 10 years in the industry, in the sense that in the beginning of 2000, for example, in Germany, there was a saying on the people working in the industry, they said, the internet will go away again. And this was a belief in the publisher sector. And so they didn't invest in digital. This hindered more or less 10 years of inventions, or at least development, and trying to build ways to report on how the digital area affects societies. And my point would be to say, if a society is more and more affected or involved with software, and this is the case because most of us have computers in our pockets.
Absolutely.
And this changed. And 10 years ago, there were more or less no computers in your pocket, or very, very slow and bad computers, or not really good ones. And there must be a journalism sector reporting on software or how it works, and not in the sense about IT developments, but on the societal effects of software systems. And that, I think, is what our organization is about, at least.
Want to understand algorithms? Stay tuned and listen to this podcast. If I can I just go back to my dog YouTube story and just say to you, what, at the end of the day, what can you tell people about their choices, and how do you change things? For example, when you look at your Googles and your Facebooks and your Twitters and so on, and YouTube as well. Instagram is another one. People complain a lot about the Instagram algorithms. You know, it's kind of crazy. I know I've heard a lot of people complain about that. What is within our control? In a sense that, what do I do now with this like avalanche of animal cruelty videos that I'm receiving? What is within our control to change about that?
Well, you as an individual, I would say you have not really much control. You have some, you could use, for example, some plugins about privacy you put into your browser, even on your mobile phone you're allowed to do this. There are several. Then you can probably twist some of your preferences, like you say, you can purge your history of what you you're allowed to do this. So the YouTube algorithm, for example, can forget in some way. But the thing about YouTube is, at least I think for some people and younger people, it's more or less now the new TV. And YouTube is interested, or Google, who owns YouTube, in earning money, so they want you to watch more and more because they're displaying advertisement in this.
Absolutely.
And so this algorithm behind the recommendation what to watch next is, some people called it YouTube is a great radicalization machine. So we have, at least in Germany, I don't know how it is in your country, for example, that we see a lot of right-winged and racist propaganda.
Absolutely.
It's coming up because it's often very it's very easy to understand, more or less.
Sure.
And the people behind doing this video more or less try to know how to game the algorithms, or what the algorithm more or less likes.
Yes.
And the big problem about this is Google or YouTube is not really accountable on that. They are not opening up, even not for researchers or, let's say, governments, how it works.
Yes.
And our point would be, we need access to this. The civil society and society as a whole, like when there's something forming the public opinion so much, there must be a kind of democratic control on this. And what we're going to do, we try to develop, or we start a program this year about better understanding how the recommendations work. There has been some work on this, but the problem is we don't know how the personalization aspect works exactly.
Absolutely.
We have some ideas, and we do another project about how Instagram timeline is moderated. So, and this is often we try to collect data, ask people to give us the data. We call it a data donation, and try to it on a, let's say, very basic level, try to reverse engineer how these systems work. So
exactly.
we work together with software developers and statisticians and so on, better get an idea.
Yeah. So basically, at the bottom of what you do, would I be correct if I said that really what your work is aimed at is really the greater good of society?
Yeah, well,
or is that a bit too simplistic?
We use this slogan, for the many, not the few. We have software systems, and they're not bad in the principle, but they should be structured and work so the many benefit and not only the few.
Right. If you look at the unfolding of our political history, and you look at the rise of the Donald Trumps of the world, and they're more of his ilk, and then you look at things like his base in America, as they call it, and you think to what extent is that right-wing philosophy, not only in the US but in other parts of the world, being fueled really by their online presence and the fact that their own prejudices are being reinforced all the time, so that they don't have the opportunity to see opposite or more progressive views, so their conservatism becomes more deeply entrenched, and in turn it entrenches, I see people like Trump as an autocrat. So there is an impact on democracy, certainly in the broader sense, right?
Well, this is a discussion about so-called filter bubbles.
Right.
There's, as far as I know, in the discussion in social science, if they really exist, because there are some studies showing that the internet enable people to have a broader view, and most people get in touch with us. But there's a small group which is really only sees a very certain area of information. But I would argue this has always been the case, because before the internet you had more or less one newspaper probably, you had one radio station and one TV station. So I would say this is not a new phenomenon. Right. So, but it affects every layer of our society.
Correct.
And these layers, of course, interact with each other. What maybe the difference is, we now see more different opinions than before, because before that we had more gatekeepers.
Correct, that's true.
And in the public sphere there was very controlled information about what you allowed to say.
Absolutely.
And to know. And obviously there were much more views on society in the world, but we weren't able to see it, or only had some studies. But
exactly.
And I think this is what the right wing, the populists, understand better probably than progressive people.
Correct.
How to tap
use
into that and to reinforce that. But we could have software systems in place which probably help to have a fairer society, I would say. And help people to understand how things affect them. So this would be one way to counter disinformation, I would say. But again, and this I think is a problem, at least in Germany, where I have of course the most insight, we see that administrations and government has huge problems to develop software which really works. They go to private companies. Private companies know there's a lot of money into it, and when they start a project, they don't stop to develop. Even if it goes wrong, they get more and more money.
Right.
So there's not really, they don't really need to do good software to get something, to get money from the government. I think this is one vector we have to work on, that our societies develop better software for the public good. And then we could probably, we don't need Facebooks or so. It's
exactly.
It's a private company, but we could have it in a kind of public, or the public sphere can be owned by the public.
Just another question which I've heard, because obviously this is a conversation that a lot of people have about this privacy issue and the algorithm, and where people in all of this, and some people think, okay, if I don't have a cell phone and I don't have a laptop and I don't go online, then the algorithm and all those strange and weird things out there on the internet can't touch me. Now, that's not true, right? Because again, the algorithm impacts our lives in ways we're not even realizing that it does. Whether if I'm driving to work in the morning, even just the traffic lights there's some kind of algorithm that's working there. There are all kinds of ways, and so you can never completely avoid it. There's also the issue about the distrust of things that are software, automated beings, and they're not, because you always need that human touch as well, don't you? So what is also the matchup between this online world and people, i.e. artificial intelligence and real intelligence, if you want to call it that?
Well, in a pessimistic view, I would say what's developing right now is a society where only people who have money can get humans handle their issues.
Yeah.
Because humans are expensive. And software is very cheap.
Yeah.
Could be very cheap.
Yeah.
So this is a kind of dystopian development that we have, a new kind of class division.
Right.
Let's see it from a positive way. Topic of the century will be climate change, of course.
Absolutely.
So, and it has a lot to do how much we consume, how we travel, and the huge chances are that we now have these interconnections with the internet, that we could organize society in another way. So this is again what societies have to decide on, how they will organize their society and how they will make use of
and accommodate
computers
exactly.
And, but what we need is, of course, people have to be aware about how does it work. The basic understanding on how the internet works is not really widespread, I would say. I would say we need, besides in school, learning more about climate change and how to tackle that. We need more understanding and more people better educated in what digitalization does to you as an individual and to society. So this must come into schools and more in universities and so on.
Yeah. Listen to Free Speak and give us your comments on the NMT's social media feeds. Just in researching a little bit for our chat today, I noted that I think she's a mathematician, Cathy O'Neill, who describes algorithms as, quote, opinions buried in code, unquote. The other thing she says in her book, Weapons of Math Destruction, How Big Data Increases Inequality and Threatens Democracy, I found it interesting where she said, with political messaging, as with most weapons for math destruction, the heart of the problem is almost always the objective. Change that objective from leeching off people to helping them, and a WMD is disarmed and can even become a force for good.
The basic question always will be, are we allowing private companies to organize our societies or not? And that's what I think Cathy O'Neill means. If the intention of the software design can be changed, and if it's changed maybe away from maximizing profits to maximizing social good, whatever this is, then it could have a positive effect.
A positive effect. Because also that's interesting that you say here in Africa our tendency in the past has always been to fight the control of governments. And as you know, this has become a really negative aspect of our online life here, is how often certain African governments, but not only, of course, further afield, are just shutting down the internet, using state security or internal security as the excuse really to silence people's voices, especially if they are dissenting. So that to us has always been the big risk. But what you're pointing out is also that big corporate, the dangers of the big corporate and the private sector doing exactly the same thing in different ways. And as you say there, the intent being to maximize profit, probably rather than to control hearts and minds. So, Lorenz, maybe just to end off, we sitting here in Namibia, in Africa, how do we, just to bring it back home here, because as you say, you're working in Germany, you're the only one of your kind there. There are possibly a few in the US. What should we in Africa be doing? How do we, you did mention earlier, yes, more awareness in schools, the issue of climate change, for example, and what we can do. We don't want to always appear to be helpless and hopeless recipients of what happens in the Western world. How do we take this forward and put our own stamp on the kind of society and the kind of online world that we want?
The so-called developing countries have one advantage, because they missed some things which happened in the developed world.
Some of the
so
bad
they
things.
can leapfrog them.
Okay.
What I saw is that, for example, or I think this is basic knowledge here, most people using only smartphones. They don't
Correct.
have laptops or
Right.
desktop computers
It is,
because they're too expensive for us.
And it's mainly mobile technology overwhelming in Africa, yes.
Yeah, and there's a lot of potential for empowerment in having this kind of ability to organize ourselves. You see it a little bit. I think you have some car sharing app, which is not Uber here.
Okay.
And there are always a lot of people, especially probably younger people now at universities or at school, who have good ideas.
Yep.
And they have good understanding. They're very bright, and you have to identify them and develop probably a space where they can develop ideas.
Yep. Innovation and sort of hubs.
And just a kind of hub and work together with the government, because often the government, they have not the people in place who have ideas, and they tend to buy the software products by big companies because they can lobby for it and have the money. But if you say, here we have ideas, and which is much cheaper, which probably will be open source, which is owned more or less by the society.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, develop spaces for this.
Absolutely.
Because there are people who want to work in this field, and they have to work in a bank, which is boring because there's nothing else to do. So the main message is that it's not so hard to handle some basic tools to get insights out of data, or how to understand how the systems and the processes behind them are working. It's not magic, and you don't have to be a rocket scientist.
That's something, even myself, you feel slightly intimidated by the thought of all these algorithms and things, and it seems like it's terribly mathematical and complex, but obviously you're breaking it down and showing people there is a way. So Lorenz, thank you so much for joining. We could talk for hours, but we probably have to end it. Thank you so much, Lorenz.